saying, why should you check your blood sugar? You should check your blood sugar because caring about this is step one. And if your morning fasting sugars are above 100, I guarantee there's high insulin in your system. When you look out at the data that's out there, I've had a few people write in to say, does the Dr. Boz ratio, did you just make that up? And I'm like, well, let me show you how that came about. So when you look at the literature out there for insulin and for inflammatory states, specifically, we have the highest level of measurements from cancer protocols and something from Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who does this press pulse protocol for cancer patients. Again, when I wrote the book, Any Way You Can, that book was specifically addressing my mother's journey. We had never been on a ketogenic diet. I was learning it and teaching her as fast as we could. And I wrote notes and I turned those notes into a book. But where my source material came from was Thomas Seyfried in his book, Cancer, a Metabolic Disease, one of the places. But as you look in here, I'm going to show you how they came up with the GKI and where the Dr. Boz ratio fits in correlation with that and why we use it. So here was this patient's blood sugar at 97. Just so you can see, when you're working in in America, that would be 97 milligrams per deciliter, but the rest of the world is going to measure millimoles per liter. And so the ratio is converted. So a 97 blood sugar was a 5.3 on the other scale. The ketone numbers, everybody measures with the same units. And so when you come over to the glucose ketone index, her glucose ketone index would have been 5.3 to 1.2. But in order to translate what that ratio is for a patient, they need to take the ketone to a denominator of 1. So her ratio, her glucose to ketone ratio would have been 4.5 to 1. And you're like, okay, that's a lot of math. You start with 97, you divide 97 by 18, you put that 18 or that 5.3 next to the 1.2, and then you reduce that common denominator to 1. Or you just divide that glucose by 97 and take the ketones by 1.2 for a Dr. Boz ratio of 80. Let's just do a couple more. This one down here was a glucose of 75, so that means her millimolar number would be 4.1, and the ketones in this case were 0.9. So you have to take that 0.9 and increase it to a 1. So that would increase her ketone ratio, glucose to ketone ratio, to 4.6 and 1. So again, it's a lot of math, and it's not. I have kind of an engineering brain. It's not hard for me, but I'm not the one that's sick and that needs to know it. When you look at folks trying to get, Grandma Rose was trying to get her glucose ratio down to a 20, which is what the press pulse ratios were. And so we're really pushing her metabolism, asking her to do a lot, and she was not in the mood. She was not interested in doing that much math. So I simply took the glucose ketone ratios and I converted them into a much more simplified version, which is if you got a Dr. Boz ratio, which is to take the glucose and divide by the ketones. If you kept that under 80, we were pretty sure, anybody under 80 would get weight loss, but you might get autophagy, and that's a topic for another day. But if you took your Dr. Boz ratio and you got it under 40, a pretty solid chance of autophagy, and definitely a place where the immune system is being stimulated. I call the under 20s my critical care patients. An example of that would be a cancer protocol. Using it for seizures is another place. And again, we're really confident that you're getting into autophagy when you get that Dr. Boz ratio under 20. But what you are spared from is the intense, is the several layers of math that was required to get patients in the right zone. So if we do this again and we look back at Lackland's numbers, again, on Monday, she was at a Dr. Boz ratio of 88, which is one of the best numbers she's had. It's when I knew that we were going to have an epic week of needing to lower her insulin, because I now know that first thing in the morning for her body to make ketones, as long as she keeps that window of not eating, I'd love it to be about 14 hours in her, but we're going to start with 12 and help her to be successful with with that at first. And so that's where I said, take that 8 p.m. supper time and move it to a 7 p.m. should be the last snitch of food. If you're running late with the kids, I would have you fast. I wouldn't have you eat. And that's a really weird thing for Lackland to hear because she's not ever done that. So getting her food, her meal in before that supper time of having the last snitch of food at least into her stomach by 7 p.m. And you look last night, she was able to take her last bite of food. Last bite of food was at 5 p.m. She woke up this morning and had a blood sugar of 35, and her ketones were low. I expect that because she went that long without food, that she had burned through all of her ketones, and was, if we would have tested again in another 45 minutes, I bet that ketone level would have been a little higher. But she had, again, a glucose, or the insulin units she gave is down to 38. Again, we started at about 55 and several doses, or at least a couple doses, of short-acting insulin. And when I look at the prediction for what we're going to see in the next week, I know that her Dr. Boz ratio is finally at the place where she, like her son, will probably get some weight loss. And that's really exciting, not just for her, but also for me. I mean, to watch her work this hard and not have any of the benefits for weight loss.
When they say check their numbers, what does that mean? Like, let me just explain that for a little bit. So I have a ketone meter right here. It's called the 406. What she's talking about is we take our blood glucose, and we take ketone readings. And this is one of two machines that can do the same thing in one machine. There's two different strips that read those numbers, and then she works out a ratio to where you divide the glucose by the ketones to get a ratio. Anything under 80% is weight loss. Anything under 40%, you're boosting your immune system. Anything under 20%, you're fighting cancer. Was that right?
Yeah, that's a great way to. You have the slide that's got that chart that we. If you look at that, what you're really looking at is most people who eat, 50, 70, 100, or 300 carbs. If you look at the sugars along the side, those are the blood sugars, 1, 200. This is the Dr. Boz ratio, right? So you look at when you take the blood sugar and you divide the ketones into it, you get numbers that can be 150 to 200. And you look, what are we trying to predict with this ratio of dividing the glucose with your ketones? Is we're trying to measure what your insulin is. That woman's liver has got the problems it does because of too much insulin. And people say, well, doc, what's my insulin? Do I need to go to the doctor to get my insulin? I'm like, no, just
that's the beauty. We can check it at home, and you can check it most of the times with this little thing.
It's absolutely. And I would contend that the approximation that this ratio gives you looking at your liver is even more valuable than the one time you're going to spend $150 to go get an insulin check by the lab. I mean, you go into a lab, you have to be fasting. And then if something's gone wrong, like you got stressed out, you were late, maybe you had a sip of coffee and you weren't supposed to, it throws everything off. And then you're going to spend another $150 to do it again. And most people won't. Most doctors won't order it again.
Yeah.
When you can do the ratios, and really this has been a big part of the hack about how do we help somebody who's at a weight loss stall, is I'm like, I need that ratio to go down. If the ratio goes down, the body will respond with weight loss on a ketogenic diet.
So can we talk about something else? Can we talk about how during these fasting, because I felt like a total failure. And I remember seeing in this group, people had ketones of 2.0, 3.0. Somebody had 4, and I was like, what the heck? I'm totally slacking here. My highest ketone, I think, was 1.5. Now, we talked about this a little ahead of time, and I wanted to really bring this up because everybody's like, wow, how did you get your ketone so high? But it's not just about the ketone number. Right. It's also about the glucose. And my glucose number, I look back, I had a 1.5, but my glucose number was 69.
Well, this absolutely is a great teaching point because the reason that Dr. Boz ratio came about was when you study the research and you go back into the major therapeutic ways of saying we are trying to advance their chemistry into the most charged metabolic scenario that we can for people with seizures and cancer. When you translate that into somebody trying to lose weight, we're still trying to take Jennifer Marie's chemistry and advance it to the level where she will get the weight loss off that she wants. And that isn't just one number or the other. It is the combination of the two of them at once. And so when Jennifer Marie would have, not as sexy of a ketone number, only 1.5, what you cannot ignore is that her sugar was like in her 50s or 60s. So when you use the Dr. Boz ratio, it does really compare apples to apples. That
So that ratio that I had was 46%.
very,
46.
very, very good.
Yeah.
That's really
So
good.
I want to remind people that anything under 80%, you're in a weight loss zone. Anything under 40%, you're immune boosting. And then when you get in the 20%, that's cancer fighting. So that ratio, you take the glucose, you divide it by the ketone number, and you get that percentage. That's what we're talking about.
Right. And, this really is a way for us to measure what is your insulin. What is the Dr. Boz ratio really? What's the punchline that we're getting to is I want to know what's your insulin level. And when you look at people whose ketones are up there at 2, because this is the first time they've really challenged or charged their system with, depriving it of calories, their sugars are still sometimes 80s, 90, sometimes I've seen them over 100. And it's because the body's saying, hey, we have a bunch of this storage that we can empty. Yeah, I can see that she's not putting as many calories in, so I'm going to charge up the production of ketones. But unlike Jennifer Marie's situation, where she has, like, if I had a biopsy of her muscles, I would say they're like 80% keto adapted, like eight out of 10 cells are running off of ketones. That's a really advanced ketogenic state. She's practiced this a long time. If I would biopsy John's, her husband's, I would expect his to be closer to maybe 5 out of 5 or 6 out of 10. I mean, 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, meaning his ratio of the number where he's really stressed his system to push for burning ketones is not as efficient as yours. And you can tell that by what happened during his fast. During his fast, his mood got irritable. He's like, I want to go to bed. And usually their ketones will bounce way up because the liver says, uh-oh, we better make some ketones. But there are several of those ketones or several of those cells that have not burned ketones. And so they have to awaken the kind of the tools or the parts inside the cell to turn it on. Yours are turned on, ready to go. As soon as you make a ketone, your body uses it. And so it's very flexible. It's very adapted. And that's how you can keep your sugar so low. In those people who do not stress their system, they're still emptying their sugar production. They're still taking out stored glucose from muscle cells and liver cells. And the longer they go without food, the higher they raise their ketone production and become more keto adapted. So that Dr. Boz ratio really is a perfect way to snapshot what is your metabolic health? What is your metabolism doing?
Please subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos. Stay tuned.